Hey everybody, today we're out here with the recently refreshed Hyundai Tucson. This is Hyundai's compact crossover in America, designed to do business with the RAV4 and the CR-V. This refresh brings some notable changes up front and some big changes under the hood. The last time we drove the Tucson was back in 2016, and we noted that the dual clutch transmission under here was just not as smooth as a traditional automatic. If that's something that's been concerning you about the Tucson, then fear not, the dual clutch transmission is gone. Hyundai didn't change the structure of the Tucson in this refresh, so this is still the same size as the outgoing model, but we get a more modern front-end look designed to keep this very in line with the rest of Hyundai's crossovers in America. But you'll notice one key difference. The headlamps are right up here where they are in most cars out there. Hyundai's latest design language for their crossovers puts just accent strips up top, and then down here we would find the headlamps. In this particular vehicle, these are the fog lamps, these are the headlamps, right where you'd expect them to be. The attractive LED headlamps that we see here are not standard on the Tucson, but you're going to find them on most of the models on the dealer lot because they're standard on every trim except for the base model. Hyundai has packaged the active safety systems in the Tucson a little bit differently than most of the competition. Remember that the Tucson starts a little bit less expensive than most compact crossovers, and that's part of why we see a different arrangement of features. The SE trim comes with forward collision warning, autonomous braking, and lane keeping assistance, but it does not have the pedestrian detection system that we see in the upper end trims. If you get the value trim or higher, then we get blind spot monitoring and rear cross traffic detection. But the adaptive cruise control functionality that we do find standard in something like the Toyota RAV4, that's not available until the night package at $30,800, so significantly more expensive than the base trim of the Tucson. The side profile has always reminded me a little bit of a BMW X3. Personally, I think that's a good thing to be reminded of when we're talking about a mainstream crossover. It's especially this area of the design right here. At 176.2 inches long, this is on the smaller end of the compact crossover scale in America, but it is definitely still a compact crossover. This may be 1 foot shorter than a Nissan Rogue, but it's also a foot longer than a Hyundai Kona. The smaller overall dimensions of the Tucson mean that we don't find the same kind of cargo room in the back or the same kind of overall legroom that we see in a Nissan Rogue. Moving to the rear, we find tail lamp modules that wrap from the body on over there to the liftgate. These are combination modules, which means they're a combination of LED elements, the brake lights and the parking lights, and incandescent elements, the turn signal here in red and the backup light. At the bottom of the bumper here, we find dual exhaust tips, but they're just tucked up on one side. If you're wondering what these red areas are, these are simply reflectors in America. A controversial aspect of the 2016 through 2018 Tucson was what we found under the hood. It wasn't necessarily the 1.6-liter turbocharged engine, although power output from that engine was definitely lower than other Hyundai products that also used the 1.6. It was the transmission. It used a 7-speed dual-clutch automatic. Now, personally, I'm a big fan of dual-clutch transmissions, but I have to admit that they're not really for everyone out there. The reason? Dual-clutch transmissions are manual transmissions that are shifted by a robot, so they feel like a manual transmission. They can be herky-jerky in stop-and-go traffic. They're not necessarily as smooth when changing gears, and if you're going off-road or in gravelly situations, especially if you're climbing a hill on a gravel road, then you'll get some very different sorts of feel versus a traditional automatic. That's no longer the case under this hood for 2019 and 2020. Instead, we get two different engines, a 2-liter 4-cylinder naturally aspirated engine in the SE and value packages. That gives you 161 horsepower and 150 pound-feet of torque. It's mated to a traditional 6-speed automatic transmission. Then we get this engine right here. It's Hyundai's tried and true 2.4-liter engine, produces 181 horsepower and 175 pound-feet of torque. It is also mated to a 6-speed automatic. So if you're someone that passed over the Tucson previously because of the way the transmission felt out on the road, you might want to give it another look because it no longer has that same feel. Unfortunately, the traditional 6-speed automatic transmission is not going to give us the best fuel economy here. The 2-liter engine comes in between 23 and 26 miles per gallon combined, depending on whether you get front-wheel drive or all-wheel drive. This 2.4 right here comes in between 23 and 25. That is notably below something like the new Toyota RAV4. It also is not that far off of the Hyundai Santa Fe, which interestingly enough can have this same 2.4-liter engine, but uses an 8-speed automatic, not this 6-speed. When it comes to front seat comfort, I'm going to give the Tucson 9 out of 10 points. Although we don't have the same range of motion on the passenger side as we do over here on the driver's side, the only thing it's lacking is the two-way adjustable lumbar support, and that means that the seat bottom cushion is adjustable for tilt, a feature that we don't find in some of the competition. Although admittedly unusual in the mainstream compact crossover segment, I do wish that this had a 4-way adjustable lumbar support because it would make the seat a little bit more comfortable. We do have a tilt telescopic steering column with a pretty decent range of motion, however. Although the Tucson is on the smaller side of the compact crossover segment, we find a little bit more legroom back here than you might think. Still not as much as a Nissan Rogue, but a little bit more than the Toyota RAV4. That means that with the front seat adjusted for me at 6 feet tall, I still have about 5 inches of legroom left. And if I move over to the right side of the vehicle, I still have about 2 to 3 inches left with this front seat adjusted all the way back in its tracks. Before we move on, I should mention that the center seat belt position comes out of the ceiling in the Tucson. That is not my preference. We don't have any loops right here on the seat back to help correct the angle of this center seat belt. So if you do put a child seat right here in the middle, it's going to end up skewed to one side or the other. That's going to make it a little bit less comfortable for adults and child seats to interact back here. As with most crossovers in America, headroom is pretty generous. If I sit here in the middle seat where I have the least headroom, I still have about 1.5 inches left. Now this model does not have the panoramic moonroof as we're going to talk about in a bit, but we do have reclining rear seats, which is a surprising and really appreciated touch with a pretty decent range of recline. You can move these seats to a very upright position like that to square off the cargo area in the back, or you can put it in a pretty reclined fashion. These move overall about 6 inches or so. Hyundai has traditionally done a good job when it comes to packaging efficiency, and the Tucson is no different. Even though the Tucson is on the small end of the scale in terms of overall dimensions, we have a cargo area here that is more middle of the pack at 31 cubic feet. That's why in our 24-inch roller bag test, we were able to squeeze 5 bags right back here, which is pretty similar to a lot of compact crossovers in America. Going in for a closer look, we find a dual height load floor. If we pull that out and then slide it back in on the lower rails, then you'll see that it goes about 2.5 to 3 inches lower. That gives you a little bit more cargo room, but it means that the load floor is no longer level with the rear seat backs or with the cargo edge lip for the tailgate opening. Under the load floor, we have a little bit of additional cargo space and a donut spare tire. If you wanted to put a full-size spare tire back here, there's definitely enough room, but you wouldn't be able to lower that load floor to the lower position anymore. The model that we've been driving this week is a limited trim, and it does not have the optional moonroof. That would be a panoramic unit if you chose that particular option. The driver and front passenger get height adjustable shoulder belts and 2-way adjustable headrests. The limited trim has perforated leather upholstery, although the front seats are just heated. They're not ventilated like we see in some of the newer options in this segment. Speaking of the newer entries in this segment, you will find more soft touch and more premium materials going on in some of the newer two-row crossovers like the Toyota RAV4 or even the recently refreshed Mazda CX-5. The bulk of the door panels, front and rear, are hard plastics, although we do have a soft touch upper section, soft touch insert, and a small soft armrest right back there at the back. The rest of the door is all a hard plastic. Moving over to the dashboard, Hyundai has tried to break up things a little bit by giving us a soft touch stitched section right here in the middle. You can see the stitching running right there across the passenger side. We also have a soft touch upper section of the dashboard, but this is really all charcoal on charcoal on charcoal. I wish this had been a little bit more contrasty. The glove compartment is one of the bin variety. I was able to fit a 10-inch iPad inside fairly easily, although some of the larger, more modern ones might not fit. Moving over to the center of the dashboard, we have 2 large air vents integrated into that stitched section right there. You can see it bumps out in the middle. And then we have a touchscreen infotainment system mounted on the dashboard, sort of like a tablet computer perched up here. The touchscreen infotainment system is running one of Hyundai's later versions of their software. This is not quite as new as what we see in the Hyundai Palisade. It's just one step behind that, but the functionality is easily recognizable and very, very similar. Factory navigation is available, but this model doesn't have it, so if I hit this Maps button, it takes us over to the mapping interface inside Apple CarPlay. There are a few direct access buttons on each side, and then physical knobs for tune and volume. A nice touch that we see in a number of Hyundai vehicles for 2019 and 2020 is the availability of a 360-degree camera system. The images, as you can see, are useful, they're crisp, and we can select a number of different views to make parking a little bit easier. Hyundai uses a pretty traditional shifter design. Drive is all the way back there. Manual mode over to the left. We push away from the driver for gear up, pull towards the driver for gear down. We have an interestingly shaped little storage cubby right there, 2 large cup holders, an electric parking brake. We also have a drive mode button, auto brake hold, and then the button to activate and deactivate the 360-degree camera system. The center armrest is softly padded. It lifts up out of the way. We get a removable storage divider and a reasonable amount of storage right in there, although it's not terribly deep. You wouldn't be able to fit something like a gallon of milk inside. The instrument cluster is a little bit plainer than some of Hyundai's other designs. I think they're channeling their inner Volkswagen with this particular one. It is very crisp and easy to read, however, and we do have a multifunction display right in the middle. This is again a pretty typical Hyundai display. We have the ability to adjust certain driver assistance settings, see a digital speedometer, the active safety system status, and of course our trip computer readouts right there. I really like the steering wheel design in the Tucson. It's thickly rimmed, which is unusual in this category, and it has some pretty aggressive sport grips up top. On the right side of the steering wheel, we have the controls for the cruise control system. No adaptive cruise control in this limited trim. Then this button, and this toggle control that multifunction display between the speedometer and tachometer. On the left side of the steering wheel, we have the infotainment buttons with some dedicated phone hang-up and pickup buttons. Speaking just for myself, I happen to be a fan of turbocharged engines and dual clutch transmissions, and I think that the Tucson is a perfect example of why. The last time we tested the Tucson with the 7-speed DCT and the 1.6-liter turbo, it ran from 0 to 60 in 7.2 seconds. This model right here with the naturally aspirated engine and the 6-speed automatic transmission, it took 8.6 seconds to do the same. As I've said many times before, I happen to be a fan of dual clutch transmissions and turbocharged engines, and I think this Tucson is a perfect demonstration of why. The last time we tested the Tucson, it went from 0 to 60 in 7.2 seconds. That was with the 1.6-liter turbo and the 7-speed dual clutch transmission. To do the same in this vehicle, it took 8.7 seconds. That's a pretty big delta. Dual clutch transmissions are unquestionably not as smooth as a traditional automatic transmission, but they have a number of benefits. They're faster shifting. It also allowed for a wider ratio spread than we find in this 6-speed automatic transmission, so first gear was more aggressive than what we see in this. That accounts for some of the variance. And the rest of the variance can be attributed to the turbocharged engine. Even though it produced less horsepower, it produced more torque, and it produced the torque over a much broader range than this naturally aspirated engine. And that's why it was able to go 0 to 60 more than a full second faster. But according to Hyundai, the shoppers have spoken, and that's why we find a traditional automatic transmission under the hood. I have a little bit of experience in that area because my own videographer, who drives vehicles around quite frequently, she hopped into the Kia Soul 1.6-liter turbo last week, wasn't the biggest fan of that 1.6-liter turbo engine and the DCT, hopped in this vehicle, and she thought that this was a little bit better feeling, more to her personal tastes, even though it was a little bit slower. The big difference is going to be if you live in an area where you have a lot of stop and go traffic or a lot of slow hill speed climb. Two areas where dual clutch transmissions definitely don't perform as well as a traditional automatic. But for my usual driving circumstances, I would prefer the DCT. So I am a little bit sad that Hyundai no longer offers that as an option. Moving on from there, in our 60 to 0 braking test, this model took 117 feet to stop from 60 miles an hour back to 0. That's a pretty short stopping distance for the compact crossover category. The overall light curb weight of the Tucson and of course the tire choice definitely play into that braking score. They also help play into the handling score. The Tucson is one of the better handling vehicles in this category. In terms of overall steering feel, this isn't quite as good as something like the Mazda CX-5, but in terms of overall grip and fun factor, it's really not that far off the Mazda. It's also not that far off the Mazda in terms of overall 0 to 60 performance. I am of course talking about the naturally aspirated engine in the CX-5. If you get the turbocharged engine, then it is one of the fastest mainstream compact crossovers. If you want even better handling in your Tucson, there's also a sport trim available, and that will give you 245 width tires. The interesting thing about that sport package is that they haven't made any body changes to the Tucson, so you could put those 245 width tires on the limited or the ultimate trims of the Tucson if you wanted to, and that would really improve the overall handling ability. It's going to give you a little bit more lateral grip. That's something that we don't see in the Mazda CX-5. No version of the CX-5 has tires that wide from the factory, so I'm not quite sure if they would fit easily within the wheel wells of the CX-5. Nobody out there seems to have tried yet. Unfortunately, the Tucson Sport is not going to give you any extra power. So if you get the Sport with all-wheel drive, it's going to go slower 0 to 60 than the model we're driving because this is a front-wheel drive limited. The excellent handling is thanks to a slightly firmer suspension tune than we find in most of the compact crossovers in America, and an overall ground clearance that is a little bit lower than some of the newer higher entries like the new Subaru Forester or even the new Toyota RAV4. I don't find the suspension tune punishing by any stretch of the imagination, but this is not as soft, not as comfortable for longer highway journeys as something like the Subaru Forester or the Nissan Rogue, and that's why I'm going to give this a B overall. In our cabin noise test, this model clocked 71 decibels at 50 miles an hour, making this one of the quieter options in the compact crossover segment. That surprised me a little bit because the last Tucson was a little louder. I'm a little disappointed that Hyundai chose not to put their newer 8-speed automatic under the hood. That would have helped improve not just acceleration, but also overall fuel economy. This has been beating its EPA score of 25 mpg by just a hair. We've been averaging about 25.5 mpg over a week of mixed driving. But as it is, that is still significantly below the new Toyota RAV4, which gets 30 mpg. Even the lowest fuel economy in the base engine in the RAV4 is going to get you 28 mpg, notably higher than we have here. And if you get the hybrid version of the RAV4, that's going to give you 40. With the Tucson refreshed for 2019, there are no major changes for 2020. Hyundai has already announced what the 2020 model will have in each different trim level, and that's what we've been talking about in this video. But the prices you see on your screen are 2019 prices, because for some reason Hyundai has yet to release those. The major things to know about the pricing are that the SEL Plus trim is gone, the value trim and the SE trim get the 2-liter engine, SEL Sport and Limited get the 2.4-liter engine. So although the base price is $23,350, to get the engine that we were driving this week, you have to step up to $25,750. And if you add all of the options to your Tucson, you'll end up right around $33,000, plus tax, title, and destination, of course. What struck me as interesting about this pricing lineup, and we'll talk about this more a little bit later, is that $25,750 is oddly the exact same price as a Santa Fe with the same 2.4-liter engine. Now let's move on to the competition. Obviously, our first and most direct competitor has to be the Toyota RAV4. Toyota has completely redesigned their compact crossover for the 2019 model year, and they've really given it a bit of a character transplant, because I didn't care much for that last generation RAV4, but the current generation RAV4 is an awfully good deal in its segment. It starts at $25,650, which is notably more than the base version of the Tucson, but you get more power standard, a little over 200 horsepower. You also get an 8-speed automatic transmission, not a 6-speed, and you get radar adaptive cruise control and all of Toyota's latest active safety technologies. You don't have to work your way on up trim ladders in order to get those features in the RAV4. Also, a big benefit for the RAV4 is frankly the new hybrid system. It's a no-compromises hybrid. We get better performance than we find in the regular version of the RAV4 and 40 miles per gallon even in real-world driving. We also get all-wheel drive standard in that model. Now, admittedly, the hybrid RAV4 is going to be a lot more expensive than the base trim, but it is going to be competitively priced with a lot of versions of the Tucson. 40 miles per gallon will save the average shopper in this segment money even over the term of a 3-year lease compared to most of the direct competition or even the non-hybrid version of the RAV4 in their own lineup. But because the Tucson's fuel economy is on the low end of things for this segment, you're really going to notice a big cost of operation difference between it and something like that RAV4 hybrid. Hyundai fights back with a longer warranty and I think more interesting styling than the RAV4. The RAV4 styling has definitely improved, but I can definitely see someone that might like the Tucson styling over the RAV4. And some surveys have put Hyundai reliability a little bit above or right equal with Toyota. So factoring in that longer warranty, you could have lower maintenance expenses long term. The last generation Tucson may have had some maintenance concerns with its dual clutch transmission, but the 6-speed automatic that they've replaced that with for 2019 and 2020 has been problem-free in every other vehicle Hyundai's put it in, so I don't expect the Tucson to be too far out of the norm for Hyundai. It's going to be very, very reliable. And then of course there's the effective price tag. The RAV4 has been pretty popular and it's selling basically for MSRP at the moment at most dealers in America, whereas the Tucson, Hyundai's been pretty aggressive at pricing overall and they're putting a little bit of extra cash on the hood. So we don't normally talk about this here at Alex and Autos, we normally try and stick just to MSRP, but you should know that the Tucson is likely going to be selling at a bigger discount. So depending on your overall deal, that delta between an effective comparably priced RAV4 and a comparably priced Tucson could be on the large side. Next up, we have the Honda CR-V, a perennial favorite here at Alex and Autos. The big thing to know about the CR-V is it is definitely bigger on the inside. We have more cargo room and we have more rear legroom as well. But it's going to cost you more. It's about $1,000 more than the Tucson for the base model. And that base model doesn't have all the same active safety technology standard that we see in the RAV4 or the upper level trims of the CR-V. We don't get Honda sensing, for instance, until $27,350, but that also gets you Honda's excellent 1.5-liter turbocharged engine. Outside of some of the high-performance alternatives in this segment, the CR-V has absolutely excellent acceleration thanks to that turbo and the CVT. There have been a few reliability troubles with that 1.5-liter turbo, but I think that Honda has them mostly ironed out. A lot of those seem to end up relating to cold start situations where people didn't run the vehicle for very long. I think the CR-V is also an excellent value at the top end of things. We may not have as much power in the top end versions of the CR-V as something like a Mazda CX-5 with its turbocharged engine, but the Honda ends up being a pretty good deal. It also has a very well-appointed interior, very comfortable, and very roomy in the back seat and in the cargo area. The CR-V is definitely a vehicle to beat in this segment. Speaking of the CX-5, we should definitely include that in this comparison because the CX-5 is absolutely beautiful. It is also about the same size overall inside as the Tucson. It's a little on the smaller side for this overall segment. The Mazda is more than just good looks, however. It also is a pretty good deal, starting at $24,350, very well equipped. And if you want more power in your CX-5, there is that new turbocharged model available, but the turbo is pretty expensive. It'll be at least $34,870, which is about $1,700 more than the top-end Hyundai Tucson. But I still think that turbocharged engine is a great vehicle and an excellent option in this particular segment. And now we have to go back to what I think is the biggest problem for the Tucson, and that is the Hyundai Santa Fe. If you like the design of Hyundai's modern crossover lineup, you're going to end up at the Hyundai dealer anyway, and then you're going to find the Tucson sitting right there parked next to a Santa Fe. And the Santa Fe is quite simply the better vehicle in my opinion. It's brand new for 2019, it's been completely redesigned rather than simply refreshed, and the Santa Fe is incredibly well priced. Again, a Santa Fe starts at the same price that the 2.4-liter engine starts in the Tucson, just a little up from the base price. And we get more standard equipment in the Santa Fe. That is a little unusual. Generally speaking, when we're talking about a bigger vehicle being comparably priced to a smaller vehicle, you have to give up something in order to get the bigger vehicle. But in the Santa Fe, not only do we get the bigger vehicle with more cargo room, better interior fit and finish, better rear seat legroom, but we also get more features like adaptive cruise control and blind spot monitoring in that base model that we don't see in the comparably priced Tucson. And we get the 8-speed automatic transmission as well. Remember that the Santa Fe is not a compact crossover in America, it's a mid-size 2-row crossover, so we get 3 inches more legroom, we get more width, and we get that bigger cargo area in the back. The Santa Fe value proposition continues as you work your way up the line, so it's not just that the base model is comparably priced and comparably equipped to the Tucson. If you take a look at the limited trim of the Santa Fe versus the ultimate trim of the Tucson, we have very similar equipment and very similar pricing as well. Perhaps realizing that these two vehicles were priced a little too closely, you will see some better deals on the Tucson on the dealer lot than on the Santa Fe. But even if that delta grows to $1,000 or $1,500 separating the two models, I would rather pay the extra money and get the Santa Fe. The only reason I can think of to not buy the Santa Fe over the Tucson is if it's simply too big to fit in your driveway or your garage. But again, the Santa Fe isn't an enormous crossover, it's just a mid-sized 2-row crossover, so it's an awful lot smaller than something like a Honda Pilot or a Chevy Traverse. My bottom line on the Tucson is that Hyundai has definitely improved the formula for their compact crossover, and it's still a solid alternative in this segment, especially if you get a pretty good deal on it, but I also think that most shoppers out there should be giving a really hard look at the Hyundai Santa Fe, and that is going to be my top pick here over the options that we've talked about. The Santa Fe is really uniquely positioned in its segment because it is priced more like the CR-V, more like the RAV4, more like the Hyundai Tucson, and a lot less than something like the Honda Passport. The Passport is decently more expensive than a CR-V, and we don't see that in the Santa Fe, making the Santa Fe a really, really great buy in America. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. And as always, if you haven't found us over at facebook.com/AlexNautilus, make sure and check us out over there. You'll see what we're driving this week, and you'll be able to comment and interact with us about that. And of course, if you want to support this channel, click up there to the top of your screen or hit that join button down there at the bottom of your screen, and I'll see you next week.